Hi, and welcome to all of you out there. I'm Andy Leonetti. I'm a senior writer here at FindLaw.com, and I am excited to join you for the next installment in FindLaw's 2022 webinar series. Today, we're going to cover a topic that surfaces a lot of emotions in people for many different reasons, and that topic is traffic stops. For many drivers and passengers, a traffic stop is the only time that they interact with the police. That's not the case for other drivers and passengers, but for different reasons, for all of these people, traffic stops can be a very nerve-wracking experience, and for good reason. As we've seen all too often over the years, traffic stops can needlessly escalate out of control in a hurry. Knowing what to do during a traffic stop can protect your rights and your safety. But I really want to note that we are in no way placing all of the burden of proper conduct at the feet of drivers and passengers. We firmly believe that police officers must understand the law and respect your rights. But what we will cover today is practical advice that you can use to protect yourself. So I am very excited to have our guest join us here today, who I will introduce in a minute. He's going to share a lot of important insight on this topic. But I also want to thank you, our audience, for submitting so many thoughtful questions. But first, we'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. After today's presentation or at any time, we just want to remind you that FindLaw.com is your home for all things legal. You can find tens of thousands of legal articles and blog posts relevant to your needs and interests. And if you need a lawyer, perhaps a lawyer experienced in dealing with traffic violations, we have the world's largest searchable directory of qualified local attorneys in your area. And just another note that after today's presentation, there will be a recording available both via a link that we will email out and on YouTube. But now we'll get to the reason you're all here. Today we are joined by Jazz Hampton, the CEO and General Counsel of TurnSignl, which is an innovative new piece of technology that we will talk about during this presentation as well. Prior to co-founding TurnSignl, Jazz was an attorney at a 150-plus attorney national law firm, as well as their Director of Diversity and Inclusion. He's also an adjunct professor at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. So thank you for joining us today, Jazz.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for making this possible, and I'm excited to have this conversation here today. So, and I really look forward to it.
Yeah, I know you have a lot of good information to share with our audience today, and this is really an important topic that every driver and passenger should know about. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to you.
That's perfect, and I appreciate that, and thank you for the intro as well. And as we'll see on this first slide, we're going to kind of go over the no matter what when you're pulled over rules first. But before I dive into that, just like the wonderful background you gave just now, I kind of want to give a little bit about myself. Like he said, I'm a former attorney practicing law here in the state of Minnesota. But beyond that, I started my career when I was in law school, actually, as a public defender, where I really learned the basis for so many of these rules, and also where I began my interaction with folks who had some interactions with law enforcement. My background is also varied because my brother graduated from a law enforcement program right here in the state of Minnesota. So I know kind of a lot of corners of this conversation, and that's how I and how people here at TurnSignl kind of approach these interactions. I do agree that this isn't all on the feet of those drivers, those individuals. There's a tremendous responsibility that officers have, and we want to ensure that they're upholding that end of the bargain as well. So to that extent, the very first thing I always talk about, some of these are kind of the more obvious rules that even my parents tried to instill in me when I was first driving, when I started driving when I was 16 years old. And the first one that's really important, especially in today's day and age, is the simplest, just be polite. You have a right to assert your rights, and we're going to go through all of those, and you should do it confidently, calmly, and affirmatively. However, you should know that being polite, while it isn't required, it's always a helpful tool in the toolbox here. Because the very next point, like all people, officers have good and bad days. I know that from, I've been interviewing police officers now in an official capacity in my current job for over 2 years now. And what we know is sometimes whatever is happening at home or earlier in that day is translating into the interaction you're having, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. The next is officers have discretion. It's really important for people to understand an officer can write you a ticket, and they can also choose not to write you a ticket at any moment. They can choose to arrest you for something or give you a citation. There's a litany of scenarios of interactions that give officers discretion to make a choice. And that's why those first 2 points are really important. If you're polite, if you're having a more positive interaction with those folks, their discretion might fall better into the side that you hope that it will eventually. And how you interact with them matters to that extent. And so when you're having this interaction, keep in mind that while they have a right to make a decision, you have an ability to maybe influence that in a better, more positive way. And the next is some rules and guidelines are not the same everywhere. Right, so you might be watching a audit. There's a lot of audit the police officer social media channels, and whether it's on TikTok or YouTube or other shorts. The rules of where that person is filming that video may not be the same as the rules of the jurisdiction that you're in. It's really important to denote that. Well, there's of course federal laws that will oversee the entire country. There are local laws that will make things different, and I'm sure we'll get into those a little bit as well. And that's that last point. Many rules are enforced differently depending on where you are. The simple and easy example of this one is the smell of marijuana a reasonable articulable suspicion or sufficient to search a vehicle? That answer is much different in the state of Minnesota than it is in New York or California or Florida. And so some of these rules are going to vary, so I don't ever want anyone to be tripped up by that. And on the next slide, we get a little more in depth on just some of these best practices as well. So first and foremost, you should always park safely. There's a fear of folks to sometimes be in a poorly lit area. Sometimes people keep driving for a long time, maybe going to a gas station. That isn't what I mean. I don't mean drive for the next 20 miles until you get home because that's where you feel safest. I mean get into a safe traffic-wise location and park as soon as possible. That's really important. You don't want to get another citation slapped on for evading or fleeing the police. So as soon as it's reasonably safe based on traffic and vehicle conditions, get to the side of the road and put your car in park. The next is to remain calm. Easier said than done, right? But remaining calm is incredibly important. Officers are trying to look at you and make split-second judgments for their safety and for many other reasons based on how you're interacting with them. And so remaining calm is really important during that stop. And so when you turn off the vehicle, open your window enough to hold a conversation with that officer, and then always keep your hands at 10 and 2 on that wheel. Keeping your hands visible is really important, just as important as staying calm, if not actually more important, because the officers are always going to be keyed into what you're doing with your hands. Things can happen really quickly within the vehicle, and so you want to make sure those hands are visible. And then always another good piece of advice with your hands at 10 and 2 is just let the officer know what you're going to do, right? If they say, can I see your license and registration, and it's in your pocket, or your license and insurance, just say, yes, do you mind if I reach into my pocket and get it? The more you kind of telegraph what you're doing with them, the smoother that interaction can go. And to that, follow the officer's directions. So when the officer asks to produce the license and all of those things, like I said, communicate and keep your hands as visible as possible. The last is stay focused. Remember to stay focused on the officer's words. Keep the documents accessible. So don't, if the more they're tucked away, if they're in the glove box or they're under your seat, that will just raise more alarms for the officer. And that's the last thing you want to be doing during these interactions. So try to avoid that when and if possible. And lastly is don't make any sudden movements. Even if you're reaching for the right thing, sudden movements are another key training part of what officers are looking for during these interactions. And so you want to make sure not to be making any quick sudden movements during that stop. And on the next slide, we talk a little bit more about kind of what we start to know about your rights. So when we talk about your rights, again, now I'm going to be diving into things that are typically, unless I say otherwise, more universal. These are things that can transfer into all of these interactions. And we'll start here on this next slide. So these are common questions, right? So where are you going? Where are you coming from? Where do you live? It's really important for me to note that you and the passengers have a right to remain silent in that moment when they're asking those type of questions. That means you do not have to answer them. If they ask, you produce that driver's license and your proof of insurance, but all of those additional questions, you are not required to answer. One thing that you're going to hear me say a lot is you're not required to, you don't have to. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't or can't. You more than willing, you're allowed to give that information, but you should know that you don't have to give that information. And if you want to assert that right and say, you know, I don't answer questions is the most common phrase in that interaction, you have an absolute right to do that. Again, thinking of the discretion of the officer and how that might affect them and their decision-making process. But that is what they're doing, is they aren't having polite conversation with you at that moment necessarily, right? They're trying to find out more about putting together a puzzle, putting together pieces to find out if they have some kind of suspicion that can lead to further searches or inquiries or maybe even arrests, right? And so anything you are answering isn't because you're having a polite conversation all the time. It's because they're trying to learn more. If you say, I'm coming from a bar, then they might ask the very logical next question that they have a right to ask is, did you have any beverages at the bar? How many beverages did you have? And continue down that path, right? And you can just stop that whole process by saying, in a really calm and respectful way, you know what, I've been told during these stops I shouldn't answer questions, officer, but I'd be more than happy to cooperate otherwise, right? It's a great way to explain away that interaction. Remember, during that, you should be as polite as possible to reduce the risk of escalation, right? It can happen. Again, officers are human and they have good, bad, and otherwise days. So during that interaction, try to remain as polite as possible, but you don't owe an explanation either, right? If you don't want to give that answer, you do not have to during those. And I love the tip to blame someone else, right? It makes you not the bad person in this interaction. I'm sorry, officer, I've been told not to answer those questions during these types of interactions. If you do just that, then it's not, why don't you want to? It's, well, I've just been told that I shouldn't, right? And that is a really safe way to get out of that. Next, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts beyond just those kind of common questions, right? And so the do's and don'ts start with, before the stop, make sure your vehicle is equipped with in proper working order. Everything's functional. Your taillights, your wiper blades, and your plates and your tabs are not expired. A lot of folks can get frustrated about being pulled over. The most common one we hear about, especially in demographics that are statistically more likely to be pulled over, is things like an air freshener hanging off of your rearview mirror or something obstructing it. Guess what? If it's illegal, then they can pull you over for it, right? And the unfair thing is that can be used disproportionately to stop certain people, especially people of color. We've seen in statistics that bear out, but you can avoid being in that situation if you're driving with a vehicle that's equipment is in proper working order and they don't have that reason to pull you over anymore. Let's say that something did happen, maybe you did have something hanging in your window and you are pulled over. What about during that stop? Remain calm as possible, listen closely to the questions and instructions from the officer, and try to speak really clearly. When you're speaking to them, if you're making eye contact with them, if you're speaking very clearly, that can avoid some of the kind of physical and verbal confirmations they're looking for to see if you have any fears or other suspicions that they can further investigate, right? Everything is building towards if they have reasonable articulable suspicion to suspect you of a crime, whether you did commit one or you're in the commission of committing one, right? And so that's something you want to keep in mind at all times. And last is to be aware. Probable cause search is based on jurisdiction, but may include reckless driving or anything that could be in view, like drugs or weapons or anything else. You don't have to have permission as an officer to search a vehicle with your eyes as you approach it. That's both for officer safety and for a few other reasons. So if you have something that's in the car that would allow them to search it in plain sight, it shouldn't be. That kind of goes back to the before the stop. Anything along those lines should be kept out of sight. If you have anything that's in your vehicle that can be used as further probable cause, it will be found and it will be used. And so that's something to keep in mind. And the next one, some of these questions are important on the next slide for people who have questions about immigration status, right? Kind of along those same lines, there's a lot of questions. Are you a citizen or where are you born? Where are you from, right? There's not a reason to answer those questions in most circumstances, because in some states you must provide law enforcement with your name if you're stopped to identify yourself. But even if you give your name, you don't have to answer those additional questions. There's no reason that you would have to tell an officer where you were born or if you're a citizen, right? So you can keep those close to yourself, and you don't have to answer those questions about where you were born or the city or even how you entered the country, which is another really common question. However, a really important denotion to make at that time is the rules are different if you are at international borders or at airports, or if you have certain visa statuses. So keep that in mind, including whether you're a tourist or business travelers. Also, the rules can get different if you're within 100 miles of a border crossing. So keep that in mind as well, whether you're in Texas or northern Minnesota, right? The same is true on both ends of that spectrum. And to that point, really, really important, do not lie about your status or provide false documents. And I say that to say all the more reason to not answer additional questions. If the individual wants to know your name and you're required in your state to give your name, do just that, and then fall back on that same reliable. I don't answer additional questions. I've been advised that I shouldn't do that, whether it's parents or an attorney that's told you to avoid those questions. But let's say none of this goes right, and there is something that happens, whether you're arrested or detained. Let's talk about that a little bit on this next slide as well. Really important, because this is when so many issues can come about. The first, and this is true no matter what, and I cannot explain this enough. When I was a public defender, there are so many things in the written report that I was handed that next morning, and I pick up the piece of paper and I said, "You told the officers what?" The officers aren't going to come to your next hearing and tell the judge just how wonderful you were during the arrest and that you were the most pleasant human being, and don't put them in jail, because guess what? They just brought you there. That's the reason you're there. You're being arrested or detained. So the best thing you can do is remain silent and ask for a lawyer. Using that right and invoking that right cannot be used against you. So use it, right? And do not answer questions. Just remain silent and ask for that lawyer. It doesn't imply or guilt, nor can it in court. So don't answer questions or don't sign anything. Even if they say it's going to be the best deal you've ever received or you'll never get anything better, this is a really good time to consult with an attorney, and that attorney can tell you if it is the best deal that you will receive. Last is, don't make any admissions. Again, a lot of people get in their head that if you're really helpful and if you're really nice to the police officer, that isn't enough, that somehow you have to go a step further and give them maybe evidence that they're looking for during this arrest or during this detention of some kind of crime or commission. You don't have to give any additional information or admissions, and it doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person who's upholding your rights, ensuring that you'll have a fair day in court should you have to have one later down the road. So don't give admissions, explanations, or excuses. If you are arrested, you have a right to a lawyer. Right, and so make sure that you use that right. When you're if you're in custody and you're in jail, and the next morning you wake up and you have a bail or an arraignment hearing in your jurisdiction, you have a right to a lawyer in that situation, and you absolutely can have one. And during that arrest, you have a right to talk to one as well. And it's really important. These last 2 points are, you can have a conversation with an attorney that cannot be listened to, right? If you're calling an attorney, whether it's from inside of a jail or on a cell phone or anywhere else, if you have a legal right to talk to that attorney, then that conversation cannot be listened to by police officers, right? That is a rule that is set across the country and is upheld across the country. So make sure that you're aware of that. However, if you're calling your uncle, your aunt, or someone else who is not a lawyer, that conversation is not protected, and they can listen to that. There's a simple rule that you can remember, especially if you're in custody, whether it's in a police vehicle or you're in a prison or a jail, I should say, and you've been detained there. It's not they can listen to, they are listening to that conversation, and those are being recorded, and you should have that assumption 24/7, 365. So based on that, don't say anything that you wouldn't want to have outside of that conversation with a lawyer, and don't make any additional admissions, explanations, or excuses to other folks, whether it's over the phone or otherwise, because officers are allowed to listen to those conversations, which is a really important key, because it's one of the resources they have. That's what officers and prosecutors have at their hands. And to that extent, what resources are available to you? That's a really important kind of segue to one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this topic and what I'm doing now. One of the resources that is available to folks is a resource called TurnSignl. And TurnSignl is an app that protects drivers' rights, de-escalates these roadside interactions, and ensures both drivers and law enforcement return home safely at the end of each day. And how it works is pretty simple, and who it works for is pretty simple. On the next slide, we talk about how many interactions there are. There's 230 million licensed drivers in the United States. There's 32 million traffic stops per year. The app has been downloaded over 28,000 times, and it's covered in 7 states right now, and it'll be in the entire country in 2023. But this is important because TurnSignl isn't just for people who have licenses. We have seen more and more with whether it's cash bail, other restrictions on people within the criminal justice system. Even driver's license are being stripped from folks now, and so people are driving without valid driver's license. That doesn't mean they don't have a right to talk to a lawyer, or it doesn't mean they don't have a right to consult with one when they need to. And so I always say it's a great opportunity to have TurnSignl. And what TurnSignl is, it's a mobile app on your phone, and with a press of a button, it instantly starts recording that interaction with your front-facing camera. Think if you were taking a selfie video, it's recording just like that. So it's mounted on your dashboard, and then it sees both you and the officer during that interaction when you've been pulled over. It then also video conferences an attorney to be in the car with you, just like I am on this video screen with you right now. And those attorneys are available 24/7, 365. They're there to give you this kind of guidance. If you can't remember everything I've told you during this video, then a lawyer will be on the phone with you to tell you just the same things, to help you calm down, again, to de-escalate that interaction and ensure that everyone feels safe during it and that your rights are being protected. There's people all over kind of the country, from Minnesota to Georgia, California, Florida, and in the middle of the country in Illinois or Indiana that are using the app today. But what I love is some of the really positive stories we've seen from it. People like Harold, who was pulled over at 1:37 in the morning, and he pressed the button and there was an attorney on the phone with him right when he needed him at 1:37 in the morning here in the state of Minnesota. And after that interaction, Harold successfully during that interaction declined to have his vehicle searched. He answered questions only that he felt necessary to answer, and the attorney was there on the screen to help guide him through the interaction. Even the officer bent down and said, "Who's on the phone?" And the attorney said, "Hi, I'm an attorney with TurnSignl. I'm here to de-escalate this interaction," right? And at the end of that, Harold was able to give his feedback on what he thought TurnSignl meant, and he thought it was a valuable service that makes sure that the scales of justice are more evenly held, at least in the onset, and he's sure that it'll be vital in many more outcomes to come. He was one of the first folks to use the app. We're really excited to have him on the platform, and we know it to be true. There's over 40 calls a month on TurnSignl right now, and attorneys are there to answer those calls for the people who need them. The last thing I like to talk about on this slide, and it'll be my wrapping up point, is Chief Blair Anderson, who is a chief of police in the state of Minnesota, was one of the folks that the TurnSignl team went out and interviewed before this product was launched. And what we said was, what can we do so that when you come to the side of the vehicle, you know that it's going to be the safest interaction you have. And not only that, how do we know that the officers that are within your group are going to be on their best behavior? The analogy we always use is the Ring doorbell, or a security sign that says that when you press this button, someone is going to record that interaction. I don't comment on the landscaping of my friend's house after I press that Ring doorbell, because I know that I'm being recorded and that I'm on my best behavior during that interaction. And that's the same kind of thing that we know that officers can step into as well. We can ensure that because they know they're being recorded and there's an attorney overseeing the interaction, that we can ensure that that's one step further on making sure maybe those outside distractions or the things that happened earlier in the day won't seep into this interaction. And again, it can be de-escalated and everyone can get home safe. I think that's the last slide that I have here, but I know there's some questions that have been coming in, and I'd be more than happy to field some of those and maybe walk through that a little bit with the group as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Jazz. And just want to Once again, thank our audience for submitting so many great questions, and I'm gonna hit you with some of those now. We know that people have encountered a lot of different, they've had a lot of different interactions with police when they've been pulled over and they don't really know how to handle them. So the first question we got a lot of is, does a police officer have a right to stop you for no reason?
Absolutely not. And that kind of goes back to that your vehicle or make sure your vehicle's in proper working order. They have to have a reason to stop you. And it's often helpful to ask right at the onset, what was the reason? That also can prevent anything down the road, any excuse that could be used later that maybe wasn't the reason, right? If they smelled marijuana, they can't smell marijuana while they're driving past your car, likely, right? So the reason they pulled you over is really important because that is what will prevent anything else from happening after, right? The fruit from the poisonous tree is a phrase often used in law, right? If the tree is poisonous, then we won't eat any fruit from that tree. And the poison in this analogy being an illegal reason or not having a reason to stop somebody. Everything that comes after that is often, based on your jurisdiction, thrown out of the case, and it's almost as if the officer or the people investigating that never saw that stuff. They have to have a legal reason to stop you. But to be clear, that legal reason can be a broken taillight. It can be, in a lot of jurisdictions, things hanging from your rearview mirror. It can be not using a blinker when you made a turn. These are all legal reasons to stop people. And so you have to ensure that it's one of those before that interaction continues.
Yeah. Okay. And then building on that, then say you know that the officer is wrong. If you asked, if you knew that you weren't speeding and they said that's why they pulled you over, how do you continue to handle that stop then if you know in your heart of hearts that you didn't break the law, they didn't have a pretextual reason to stop you?
Great question. The first thing that I always say is safety is the #1 goal, right? You want to leave that interaction without any physical harm or emotional harm for that matter. And so the very first thing you should do is assert your rights and what you know to be true in that moment, and then let the interaction continue. So to give an example, if they said, well, you were speeding, and you say, well, you know what, I have a dash cam in this vehicle, and I know that my cruise control is on 50 miles per hour, and I'm in a 55 speed limit. I do not think that that is a legal reason, or I do not believe that to be true, and I think this stop is illegal. Then it can continue on. But what I would say is once you've asserted that, especially if it's being recorded, whether it's your own device or the officer's body cam that's recording that interaction, now that is set into the record if you ever do have to have some litigation around this in the future. But what we always say here at TurnSignl, what I say as an attorney is you'll never get to prove that point on the side of the road. There's no judge that'll come to the vehicle and say that you were right and you get to go home without a ticket. If you do receive a ticket during that interaction, now you can follow up in court with that. And I really, really, really want to underscore that you should follow up in court with that. Don't just pay the ticket and let everything go. It is a really good opportunity to make sure that everyone's held accountable in that moment.
Okay. And another question we got then too was, do you have to hand over your identification, meaning your driver's license? I would assume you'd have to, but what if you accidentally forgot it at home? I know I have driven to the grocery store and forgotten my wallet. And do I still then have to tell the officer my name if I don't have an ID to give him?
Yes, so providing the name, if it is a legal stop, providing the name is required. And whether or not it's a legal stop might not be able to be determined later until you're in court, right? But if it's not illegal, I would say, or if it is a legal stop, yes, you have to give your name if you don't have your driver's license. Provide them with the name, and they'll probably ask your birth date as well so they can identify who you are. That's part of a legal stop. However, if the stop was illegal or they didn't have a right, I would again assert that right, but I wouldn't risk any physical harm to uphold that right out there in the street. I would deny and say that it is a violation of your rights, but if you feel like it is going to escalate the interaction to physical harm, follow through with the order and then follow through with legal repercussions after. There's a million videos online of people doing just that, where they're asserting the right, If the if their rights are being violated, either constitutional or otherwise, they are followed through. Maybe they are arrested, and then on the back end they take care of it. But maybe just doing that on the front end can save you some time there.
Yeah, and we did get a ton of questions about videoing. It was probably the most popular question, and so a lot of people wanted to know is how can you, because we know that a lot of police departments have body cams now, but a lot don't still. But how can you respectfully record your traffic stop without it being considered escalatory? And how would you respond if a officer asks you to stop?
Yeah, I think, to be clear, if you are not impeding with an investigation and if you are the person involved in that interaction, you do have a right to record an officer in the course of their duty out in public, right? If you are a party to that interaction, I would say don't even try to hide the fact that you're recording. Police officers don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy when providing or when performing their jobs, but they are interacting with what may be your private rights, and so that you can notify them during that time. And some states even require the notification and makes a person aware that you're recording them. But yes, and so if they ask you to turn it off, this again goes to your discretion of saying, I'm going to keep recording for my own safety. But if that puts yourself in harm's way, if you're going to be physically apprehended and they're going to confiscate the video, that will be illegal. Police officers cannot confiscate or demand photographs or video without a warrant. They may not delete the video under any circumstances that you're taking on the phone. And so you have all of those rights to continue that recording. If they ask you to stop, it's up to you if you want to do it for your own safety. But either way, if they ask you to stop and you decide to do it, even though it's a legal or unconstitutional request, or if you decide to keep going and they take the phone away from you, you do have a real opportunity to follow up, and because your rights were violated, and you should do just that with an attorney helping you.
Yeah, great. And we also got questions from a lot of female drivers. This speaks to what you were talking about earlier with finding a well-lit parking lot or something, a place to pull over, especially like at night. Does a woman who's driving alone, does she have we got several versions of the same question. Does a woman who's driving alone and has been pulled over, do they have a right to request another officer to be called to the scene, like a backup or something, so it's not a one-on-one interaction?
Yeah, and calling for that is a really good opportunity to make that interaction safer. There's instances where there's people who are pretending to be police officers, and sometimes it's hard to make that differentiation. And even if it is the best, most straight-laced, honest police officer, if a woman feels unsafe in that interaction and wants a second set of eyes there, then she should absolutely request those additional officers to come to the interaction. And one of the things we talk about most at TurnSignl is what a great that's the reason that we are putting attorneys live on the video conference with them, so that attorney can see what you're seeing as well, is really important. So calling additional officers is always a good bet, and using TurnSignl or calling someone that can help there and be there in the moment with you is a really good idea, because we do not want anyone, whether you're a woman, whether you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community, or just a person of color who statistically is disproportionately the recipient of use of force or searches during these stops. It's really good to have a second set of eyes there.
Okay, awesome. And we also got a ton of questions about passengers. A lot of nervous passengers out there too, and I can attest to that. I've been a passenger in a car when my friend has gotten pulled over, and then a cop asked for my ID, and I just handed it over without thinking. What do passengers need to do in these kinds of situations?
Yeah, to that same extent, the passenger should remain silent. You weren't driving the vehicle unless the officer is suspecting you of committing a crime or in the commission of committing a crime. You are not a party to that. Sometimes they'll say, well, we need it for a report, and you can say, I do not feel like I want to be a part of that report, or I don't think it's necessary, unless they are articulating to you what suspicious crime what suspicion they have against you of a crime, or what crime they think you are committing. Just being in a vehicle does not constitute that, right? Even if the driver they suspect or have reasonable suspicion that they're committing a crime. Well, a driver driving recklessly while I'm in the passenger seat does not mean I committed a crime. And so ensure that they have a reason to make you give the ID. And how you do that is just asking them, what crime am I suspected of committing, or do you believe I'm in the commission of committing right now? And if there isn't one, then you don't have to produce that.
Okay. And follow up there, can a passenger get out of the car and walk away from a traffic stop?
Absolutely. If you're a passenger, you can, that is the other magic phrase, whether you're a passenger or the driver, it is always, am I free to go? If you are being detained, they have to suspect you of committing a crime, or that you are about to or in the commission of, right? And so if you say, am I being detained? Am I free to go? You can silently leave if you aren't. And if you are being detained, then they need to be able to articulate exactly why you are.
Okay. Another popular question we got is, how do you handle a stop if you're the driver or a passenger and you have a loaded weapon in the car? A lot of people also noted in their questions that they had a concealed carry permit, or just that they were legally within their rights to own a gun and have it in their car with them. How do you handle that? How do you bring it to the officer's attention, maybe, or don't bring it to the officer's attention without escalating the situation?
Yeah, that's one of the rules based on the state, that it's going to be wildly different, the requirements of telling or not telling the officer if you have a firearm in the vehicle, especially, or if it's a legally carried or permitted weapon. Let's say you're in a state where you are required to tell the officer. The best thing to do during that interaction is to let the officer know that you're carrying a firearm, and doing it again with your hands still on the wheel, letting them know where it is and that that you're legally carrying it, and asking if you need to make any additional movements to make those movements. Often officers will ask if they can take the weapon during that interaction, and it's up to you kind of how that entire interaction goes, how you're reaching for it, and all of those things. But letting them know if you're legally carrying a weapon is never a bad idea. I always say if you can do it in a really safe manner, because what that also is doing is putting them on notice that you aren't a felon, or you aren't a lot of the other things. If you have a legally permitted carried weapon, that means that the government is allowing you to do that, right? Especially for conceal and carry or permit to carry states. And so letting them know is good for your safety and theirs. But the other thing that folks like to denote is, you really have to say clearly that you are legally carrying it, and let them know where it is if you're going to tell them. It raises suspicions, and it does escalate the interaction because they have a fear around that. But that is the safest way to go about that, is keeping those hands clear.
Okay, great. And how do you respond then maybe to a search request if you don't want them to search your vehicle? Or another interesting question we had was, can you limit a search to a specific part of your vehicle? Like, I will let you look in my trunk, but not in my glove compartment. Everyone's seen it on comedies, and that a cop anyone can, quote, smell marijuana.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's present in the car. How do you respond to that if you don't want your vehicle searched?
Well, yeah, I think the baseline I would always say is, if they do not have reasonable articulable suspicion or the probable cause to search your vehicle, I would not consent to the search. There's no reason to let someone look through your vehicle if they don't have a legal reason to do it without your permission. If they have to look without your permission, then you have no choice in the matter, right? And so if you have a choice, the choice is no, right? And I would say that is for all portions of the vehicle. If you are consenting to something in the glove box, it can very quickly, that can just be the way they step into the door, and then they'll find a way to keep looking within the vehicle, right? So just say no to the search if they don't have probable cause to do that search, no matter if they just want to search a portion of the vehicle or otherwise. It's also a good reason not to put some items in the glove box like your insurance or those other documents. If you can have it more readily available so you don't have to open other things, because I promise you this, if it's at night and you open the glove box to get the insurance, their flashlight will be in that glove box as well, right? So make sure that those documents are readily available, and if they do not have do not consent to a search, that they don't have the right to do without your consent.
Okay. And then along those lines then too, what if an officer, I guess we know the answer. I know your answer, that if an officer asks if you would get out of the car, you can say no, probably. But what if an officer tells you to get out of the car? What do you do then?
Yes, yeah, you're exactly correct. If I'm not legally required to step out of the car, officer, I do not feel comfortable doing that. And if they say you are legally required, you can ask, am I being detained? Am I free to go? And if you are not, and they articulate what the crime they suspect you of committing is, then step out of the vehicle. Even if you think the reason that they give is not legal, if they're not asking anymore and they're demanding and saying you don't have a choice for your safety, I would say step out of the vehicle at that point. And again, if it is illegal, you can bring that to court and have everything that followed be thrown out, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. But safety is the #1 priority in my mind. So I don't want to tell anyone to get in a roadside altercation where your window is going to be broken in because you know that you have the right, but the officer incorrectly doesn't know that as well.
Okay. And then we have some alcohol related questions here too. And one of the most popular things was a lot of times people have one drink at a bar or at an after work function, and then they're driving home and then they get pulled over. If an officer asks if you've been drinking, but you know that you are under 0.08, how should you handle that question? Should you refuse to answer? Or we had a lot of people ask if it would be fine to lie and say, no, I haven't been drinking. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say the lying is never the route that I would go, because you have two other better options, right? The first is not answering that question, right? Mm-hmm. Have you been drinking? Officer, here's my license and insurance. Unfortunately, I don't answer other questions, right? That's option one. And then they could say, okay, well, you won't answer that question. It seems pretty easy if you weren't drinking, things that you can't say in court, but they'll say on the side of the road, right? They can do that, and they can ask those questions, and you can continue to say no. So option one is just refuse to answer the question. Option two is to say, I know that if you truly know that you're fine, I know that I'm fine, officer, and I'd be happy to submit to a breathalyzer or to a sobriety, or not to the sobriety test, but going directly to blood alcohol testing or sobriety test is one way that other folks go about it. But again, unnecessary, because now you're stepping out of the vehicle. Now there's more questions that can be asked. All of those are not necessary. It's a lot easier just to say, I don't answer questions. And if they can, without any words from you, find a sufficient reasonable articulable suspicion to then give you a breathalyzer, guess what? They would have done it anyways. So they're going to do it one way or another. You don't have to give them additional evidence during that process. So if they're going to find a way to do it, they're going to find a way to do it, and there's no reason that you should help in that process.
Right. That's kind of goes along. If you have really bloodshot eyes, or you're slurring your speech as you're saying, here's my registration, but not answering any other questions, they're already going to have kind of the pretext they need. So don't lie. Don't make it easier on them.
Yeah, because then when you blow something and you do have some kind of alcohol contents on your breath, they'll say, well, then you weren't telling me the truth. Is there anything else you were lying about? And now the ball is going to continue rolling down that hill. So not answering is better in that situation.
Okay. And to be clear, you can decline to take a field sobriety test, correct? Getting out of the car and hopping on one foot, saying the alphabet backwards. You do not have to do that if you don't want to, correct?
And it definitely varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But the best thing is you can skip in most jurisdictions, you can just skip that whole process and go straight to the thing. And a lot of criminal attorneys do suggest that in situations, because all of the other things are further evidence of impairment. Because especially a good example is here in the state of Minnesota, you can receive a driving under the influence citation without even being at .08. They can say that your actions were so severe, or you did something so onerous or ridiculous that even if you're under .08, it constitutes driving under the influence. You don't want to give any of those additional things, right? You don't want to say that, show that you couldn't walk or you couldn't stand on one leg. And so just skipping right to it can forego all that. And there's a lot of reasons also that you can explain if you wanted to, but isn't necessary. You know, I've had surgery on both of my ankles and my femur when I broke it. I had LASIK vision, and so that might affect how I am doing all of these tests, right? There's a lot of reasons that people might not be able to even give those tests accurately as well.
Okay. And one last question is just, I know you said TurnSignl will be available nationwide in 2023, but if you could just remind our viewers today what those 7 states are where TurnSignl is currently available.
Yes, so Minnesota, Florida, California, Tennessee, Illinois, Indiana, and Washington are the states.
Okay, I counted 7 too, so good job.
There we go. Got it.
And if just give that URL as well for TurnSignl one more time.
Yes. So TurnSignl is TurnSignl.com, and TurnSignl is spelled without the A, because as we're talking right now, a lot of people do not have access to justice, and so we don't have the A in our name because we're trying to bridge that gap on the lack of access to justice. So TurnSignl.com, the app is available to download. If you can't afford TurnSignl, just like public defenders, if you can't afford it, it is free to you and we won't charge you. So it is always available to you whenever you need it.
Okay, that's great. And thank you so much for joining us today, Jazz.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for all the questions too. I love them.
Yeah, and a huge thank you to all of you out there for listening in and submitting questions today. Again, you can learn more at FindLaw.com/traffic.html. And if you need to find a lawyer near you, head to lawyers.findlaw.com and look for an email from us soon containing a link to the recording of today's meeting. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good one.